Hi, y'all. My name is Michael Lane. Thanks for joining us today. Um, for those that are new to this show, we started this podcast series a little over 2 months ago. Um, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the company and what we're doing here and the point of this podcast. And then we're going to jump straight into the meat of it. Um, Friday, a really interesting development happened. Uh, the White House issued a brand new document we're going to talk about a lot. It is the National Cislunar Science and Technology Strategy document. I know that's a mouthful. I'll post some links here in a second. To kick this off, I want to just give a little bit of background. So I'm the president of Liftport Group. We have been involved in space research and space infrastructure for nearly 20 years now. We started out as an offshoot of the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team. And then over time, we branched out to a couple other things. So we first worked on the space elevator. If you've heard about the space elevator anytime in the last 20 years, it's a safe bet that our fingerprints are somewhere in the background of that. Through that work, we worked on carbon nanotubes, super strong string. Ultimately, that didn't work. And then we switched over to robotics to figure out the mechanical processes of climbing. And then when the economy crashed in 2007, we got crushed. Went out of business then, so our 14-person team kind of evaporated. But we stuck around on the edges, and I call those our zombie days. But then in 2017, we reconnected and refocused as a company to start working on the lunar space elevator infrastructure. We find that it is far easier and much more attainable than the Earth's space elevator. So that's what we started working on, and things were going fine. We were a small company, only 1, 2, or 3 of us. It wasn't very big. And then the pandemic happened, and we were faced with a choice of either close or change. And so while we are still continuing to work on the lunar elevator to keep the lights on and keep ourselves employed, we switched gears to focus on outreach, to do communications. So we hosted 27 online virtual conferences, hosting hundreds of guests. We have hundreds of hours of content on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Liftport. And then as the pandemic is winding down, we're modifying our business plan once again to focus on still outreach, but shows, podcasts, and YouTube channels that are dedicated to what's new in space. Specifically, we're focusing on the money, the finance, the commercial operations of space. And we've had some great guests, so I really want to shout out our team's prior guests. We've had Dr. Andrew Aldrin, Dr. Roger Lanius. Aldrin is one of the professors at Embry-Riddle. Lanius was the now retired chief historian of NASA and the curator at the Air and Space Museum. So he has a nearly 40-year background, 35-year background in curating the space community as it's developing. We've had some terrific guests like James Burke at the Mars Society, Kobina Hughes, a space lawyer. He doesn't like to call himself a space lawyer. He is a lawyer that's interested in space. and Laura Forsick. We've had some really terrific people. We have some more in the pipeline. We've got Rich Bowling on the way. He's a senior vice president at Redwire. The Mars Society founder, Dr. Robert Zubrin. It's been pretty neat. I sent out a bunch of invitations today. I can't share with you who they are until they confirm, but it's gonna be fun. And so what we're doing is we're looking at the money, the finance, the commercialization of this $500 billion industry, and trying to explain it, understand it, and gosh, maybe even pull out a crystal ball and imagine what's coming next. So with that prelude, I'm going to jump straight into the actual meat of our conversation today. We're going to do this in two parts because this document that came out Friday with basically no fanfare at all is kind of important. So for those that want to stick with me into the weeds as we look at space policy and kind of how it gets developed and why it's important, it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride, but stick with me, all right? And so with that, hey Kevin, nice to have you here. Appreciate that. With that, I'm going to kind of do a slide share and really focus primarily on our core documents. So give me a second while I navigate our system a little bit. And okay. Okay, that should do it. All right, let me get over there. So as you can see, what I've done, and for those that are listening on the podcast afterwards, I'm going to try to explain all the things that I'm showing on the screen in a way that is clear. And I'll be posting a ton of links here in the channel and then in our other places as well. So you should be able to follow on a little bit. And then again, this is ultimately becoming a podcast. So while we're doing the live capture online on YouTube, we really expect this to be a long-lived interview that lives on in various podcasts. So what is this thing? So first of all, we're talking about a document with the seal of the President of the United States, specifically the National Science and Technology Council. So first of all, we're going to talk about what that is a little bit. The document is here if anybody wants to follow along. It's at the it's hosted on the White House servers, and the document says a product of the Cislunar Technology Strategy Interagency Working Group of the National Science and Technology Council. So all of that is saying it's a part of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And for them to put the White House stamp on it's kind of a big deal. I hope you appreciate that that's kind of important. Over the last several years, there have been a lot of documents coming out of the OSTP. There's a pretty good list of them. I'm going to post again on the channel here and also here. But you can find this pretty easily by just Googling Office of Science and Technology Policy and the National Science and Technology Council. So there's a pretty in-depth set of websites under those two areas. And what's the point of the OSTP? to provide the president and others within the executive office of the president with advice on the scientific, engineering, and technical aspects of the economy, national security, homeland security, health, foreign relations, the environment, and the technological recovery and use of resources. That's a whole lot to put under the OSTP. Science and engineering are pretty obvious. Technology development, that's pretty interesting. How it impacts our economy is pretty powerful. We'll note that there hasn't been anything from the OSTP on Bitcoin or various forms of cryptocurrencies. I think that's pretty interesting. So this organization, OSTP, and then the National Science and Technology Council, it helps America handle national security, homeland security, health. This was certainly a powerful force during the pandemic. And it even strays into foreign relations. You'll see in the document in a minute that the State Department has been pretty actively involved with this document development. And then the Science and Technology Council, its role is supportive. The NSTC prepares research and development strategies that are coordinated across federal agencies aimed at accomplishing multiple national goals. Okay, so that's a little on the vague side, but really the NSTC is the workhorse that gets all this stuff done. And then within that, I know it's getting a little like, Russian nested dolls, but within that, the part that matters to us tonight is this new subcommittee on Cislunar Science and Technology and the Cislunar Technology Strategy Interagency Working Group. Now that is a mouthful. Let's break it down a little bit. So it's a subcommittee, and it is the Cislunar technology. So I think everybody listening to this knows what that means. The space between here and the moon, including the moon and a little bit beyond into the Lagrange point. So we're going to talk about the specific definition here in a minute. But this is an interagency working group. Now, it's super important to note that, an interagency working group means it's just a governmental program. It's not the other parts, right? The other parts of our world, right? So I always refer to ACDC, academic, civil, defense, and commercial. Academic, civil, defense, and commercial. This is all civil and a little bit of defense. So only the C and the D are represented in ACDC. And that probably matters. That's probably really important. And so when I look at this document, I'm initially a little disappointed in it, but then I look at who the players are and what they accomplished, and I have to just go ahead and just give them credit for what they accomplished. But I don't think it's the be-all, end-all document that I had hoped that it would be. So kind of understanding the players is really important. And then kind of the final thing to talk about relating to National Science and Technology Council, I did some digging into what they've produced in 2022, and they built 28 documents. It was a range of stuff. You can imagine COVID was in there and other conversations and science and technology topics. But one thing that was really fascinating to me was there were 7 documents that all had something to do with space, whether it's in orbit, service and manufacturing, or I was surprised to see an asteroid detection and deflection paper in there. And it feels like something happened since March of this year, because all of those documents were written since March. I don't know if they added new people to their advisory team, or if somebody from on high got a message and said all of a sudden, oh, maybe we should be paying attention to this. But I thought it was pretty interesting. I really thought that it felt like there was a change in decisions of some kind, or leadership, or they added a new person to the team. I really wasn't sure what that was all about, but I was happy to see it. I would really like to know a little bit more about, the makeup of the organization and who was involved. But it's pretty obvious that there was a tone or content shift starting from the Q2 of this year. So this document provides a first interagency strategy to guide the actions of the U.S. government in advancing scientific exploration and economic developments across activities in cislunar space. I think that really sums up the whole point of this. And I wonder if this is the order that felt good to the folks in Washington, D.C. writing, or if this is the order they actually are going to be prioritizing. Advancing science, exploration, and economic development. Because the thing that I see the most activity on, and this might be because of my own blinders and my own the vision that I can see, is I have a focus on economic development. I don't have a focus on exploration and science, but I see a whole lot happening on the economic development side of things. So I wonder again, is this document written in a way to make other people comfortable by saying science and exploration are first and economic development is last? Because it feels to me, and I don't have evidence for this, but it feels to me like the economic development is really the driver from what I can see from my own biased knowledge base. This document directly supports the United States Space Priorities Framework. That's another document that's worth looking at. I got it right here. Give me a second. So this came out at the end of last year. And it's very important also. I'm not going to get into it at the same level that I'm getting into this one. But that one kind of sets it says priorities framework, but it sets the foundation for what the United States is trying to do. And one of the things it says very clearly is, quote, advance a robust cislunar ecosystem. We have a lot of spacecraft going to the moon now. We have one just arrived a couple days ago, Capstone. One is on its way. One took, Artemis 1 took some spectacular photos this morning, or I think it was last night. So that's what we have. Japan will launch in, I think, a week and a half, something like that, iSpace. And China's been there for a really long time. An operational rover that's been working since 2019, January, I think, of 2019. So when they talk about a robust cislunar ecosystem, this document is definitely talking about the United States, but I think it's really important to know that while space is a vacuum, this document does not live in a vacuum. We know that that Israel and India attempted missions to the moon 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Both are going back. So lots going on there. And I think this document is a reflection on just how much activity there is here. And they also want to be consistent with interagency and international efforts, including the Artemis Accords. I think that's really important. We're going to talk about the Artemis Accords in quite a bit more detail later on. I'm going to guess that most people watching this know about the Artemis Accords, but if not, we'll brief you on that. They're also trying to stress that they're going to be in compliance with many other treaties and United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, amongst many others. And then they're also saying, look, we wrote this other document, we meaning the Office of Science and Technology Policy, wrote another document called the National Strategy for In-Space Servicing, Assembly, and Manufacturing just a few months ago. And so let's definitely make sure that gets, it's in compliance with the other document that we also are promoting. So I'm going to post that one. I think that ISAM document is a pretty fun read too. I know you got to be a hardcore nerd to want to read these PDFs from the White House, but this, just so everybody's clear, this is the stuff that sets NASA and everybody else in motion. And when eventually requests for proposals and missions are planned, it uses these documents as their justification and starting point. This is how budgets get built. This is how missions get planned. And at our level, this is where acceptance of big ideas starts from. So I don't expect to ever see we need to build a space elevator on the moon in one of these documents, but you can read between the lines about where these large organizational documents are taking us. And I think that's one of the reasons I read these things, because I think they're important. Curiously, there's a note here at the bottom. I don't think I've seen this before. It's the copyright information. This document is a work of the U.S. government and is in the public domain. So there's stipulations here beyond that, but I think that's kind of important. And with that, we're going to take this document, we're going to put it side by side with the original, and we're going to take my version that has all of my notes on it, and we're going to post both of those on our website, because I think that this is the kind of stuff that helps everybody understand like where we're going in space. So we're scrolling on a little bit more. This Cislunar Technology Strategy Interagency Working Group has a bunch of members. I'm just going to rattle them off quickly. Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of State, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, National Science Foundation, U.S. Geological Survey, National Security Council, National Space Council, Office of Management and Budget, and Office of Science and Technology Policy. Now, that's a great list. What is this? This is 12 organizations, 11 organizations. This represents a lot of really, really smart people, right? I mean, I got to say, I'm pretty impressed by them. But I think you can learn a lot about this list and who's on it and who isn't on it. Again, this is interagency. That's the key word of this document. What role did the other components of ACDC have to play? Where in this is the academic component? We have a Department of Education that wasn't a part of the working group. There's talk about here, we've got the Department of Commerce, but it was the Office of Space Commerce, pretty small, The FAA and the FCC and NASA are all sub-elements of the Department of Commerce. So why are the FAA, FCC not on this list? NOAA. A lot of people don't know this, but the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA has control over a lot of satellite deployments. They have the FCC and FAA have a lot of control over radio communications and spectrum allocation, radio spectrum allocation on orbit. I would have thought those folks would have been invited to the party. Okay, the National Security Council is there, so NSA, NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. I'm going to hope that they were part of this program. But again, not called out specifically, so it's a little hard to tell who the members are. And I think who you have in the room really influences whether this is a credible or not credible document. And I'm not saying it's not a credible document. I would just feel much more comfortable if I knew, the biases that went into the room and the outcomes that came, that were a result of this document. So I do feel like there's some stuff that should be here that's not, and I'm a little perplexed why not. And there's nothing in here about academia. And even though this is an interagency working group, there are plenty of academic partners that could have been represented here. So I'm just a little perplexed since ultimately it's going to be the academic folks that have to solve some of these critical problems. And I think very likely, not certainly, but likely, it's going to be the commercial sector that enacts many of these objectives. So it just feels a little strange. Again, not slamming anybody, because I'm really glad this document exists. I really want to stress that. I'm very happy that this document exists. An incomplete policy is far, far better than no policy whatsoever. So hats off to all of those folks. I've got the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, highlighted here because I want to point something out that a lot of people don't know. Again, I'm going to post a link here. The USGS has been involved with mapping the moon. Now, let that sink in for a second. Why is the U.S. Geological Survey involved with mapping the moon? Well, first of all, they have some terrific equipment. So it is appropriate that if anybody's going to map anything for the United States, the USGS is probably the folks that you should go to. But it's not like they have their own equipment. So they're probably pulling stuff in from El Cross down in Arizona. I'm just going to make some guesses on that. But it is pretty exciting to hear that they are involved, and they've been involved with lunar. They've had an interest in the moon for a couple of years now. So I think that's a pretty important. And it baffles me why, like, I think it makes sense that they're at the table, but other DoD folks, national security folks that are not listed, specifically, it feels odd that they're not called out. And it feels odd that other elements of the Department of Commerce, FAA, FCC, NOAA, are not called out in the same way that NASA is called out separately. So yeah, I just think that this membership is a little interesting, and it doesn't raise red flags, but it's definitely some puzzlement and some yellow flags. Okay. Then we're going to move on. We've got it's about a 16-page document. We're not going to cover everything, and I'm actually going to break this into 2 parts. We're going to work on just the introductions today, and then on Wednesday we're going to go into the objectives. The objectives are super important. I really want to encourage you to come back for the objectives. I'm going to read them off so you've got a little bit of taste of what's to come. But this is going to be Wednesday's topic. Objective 1, support research and development to enable long-term growth in cislunar space. Pretty good. I like that. Objective 2, expand international science and technology cooperation in cislunar space. Objective 3, extend U.S. space situational awareness capabilities into cislunar space. And 4, implement cislunar communications and position, navigation, and timing capabilities with scalable and interoperable approaches. That one's a mouthful. Gosh, we could do an entire series on that last one. So those are the 4 objectives. We are going to cover them in detail next week. And let's be clear about this. The reason we're going through this document is that these objectives are where NASA is going to put its money. Department of Defense is going to put its money. Department of Energy is going to put its money. These are National Science Foundation also going to put its money. This is a cover document that each of those organizations can then showcase and feed into their SBIR, STTR funding systems. They'll write some RFPs, requests for proposals. Defense Innovation Unit is going to use this. All of these organizations are going to use these 4 core objectives for funding decisions. So that's why we read these documents. They're boring. They're hard to get into. I'm a nerd, so I do it. And I just got a message from Terry Trevino. Yep, your satellite project does fit well here, sir. So congratulations. No space elevators in it for me, but there's plenty of stuff in there for you, sir. All right. So we're going to cover that on Wednesday. So Terry, that's your call. Try to be here Wednesday or catch the video afterwards. All right. So let me get a drink of water just a moment. Okay, so the executive summary. The United States will lead the world in responsible, peaceful, and sustainable exploration and utilization of cislunar space, including the moon, consistent with the U.S. Space Priorities Framework. All right. And so I already mentioned the U.S. Space Priorities Framework, and I posted a link to it. So you definitely should take a look at that because, again, everybody in Washington, D.C. wants a cover document, a document that covers them in case there's a problem. So the Space Priorities Framework is pretty good. It's pretty vague. So that's why I was excited when this one came out because it went into some more specificity. But again, we're going to read this in order, right? Responsible, peaceful, and sustainable exploration and utilization. Again, is this word choice matters in Washington, D.C. This stuff is important, and kind of knowing where they're coming from is really useful. So I like the peaceful's in there. I think a lot of people are going to see this and get worried, right? Because the Department of Defense was consulted on this document. And there is some stuff in here that is very defense-centric. And on our program a week ago, we talked about sustainable exploration. Sustainable still has not been defined. So one of those wiggle words that I think it means whatever the senator or congressman that's approving the budget thinks it means. Pardon me just a moment. Excuse me. So, personal note, I wound up in the emergency room this week. I have a cold that's been here for 3 weeks since I was in Arizona, and I am mostly better, but it went into my ear as an ear infection, and my eardrum didn't burst, but it was pretty rough for a couple days. So I'm getting better. This sustainable question is still an unknown question. And then what's this next piece? Cislunar space provides opportunities for answering many of our highest priority questions in planetary science, opportunities to explore the history of our solar system and sun, a radio quiet environment that can catalyze a new generation of radio astronomy, the potential for economic growth in space, and a valuable region for testing human exploration technologies and operations to enable crewed exploration to Mars and beyond. I just want to point that out, that is one sentence. That is one sentence. They put a couple $billion worth of funding proposals into this sentence. I feel like you don't even need to read the whole document. If you just read this line, you pretty much know what their priorities are. So if anybody wants the too long didn't read version, this is it. Read this line and then you're set. You can go back to whatever you're doing tonight. So I want to point out the radio quiet environment for radio astronomy. That comes up over and over and over again in this document in a way that I've never seen before. So somebody somewhere is trying to look out beyond what we normally look at. And I think that's pretty interesting. I think that leaves a lot of room for some interesting NIAC proposals, NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts proposals. I think it leaves a lot of room for some National Science Foundation funding because this radio astronomy component and a radio quiet environment comes up in this document over and over and over again. I don't highlight how many times it comes up, but it's a lot. It may be the most used phrase in the doc, right? So if anybody wants to do a word count, I always think it's somewhat interesting to do word counts on these things and kind of look at the word salad and try to come up with the words that are used the most and prioritize them. So I think there's an interesting opportunity coming out of there. Again, it would be super awesome if they bullet pointed this and said, these are in order. This is what we're actually going to prioritize in this order. They don't do that for us, so we're kind of left guessing. But I like this potential for economic growth in space that feels like it was kind of placed in. It doesn't feel like it was the main thing. So if you think of it, highest priority questions in science, that's one science. Opportunities to explore the history of the sun and the solar system, I'd say that's two more sciences. Radio quiet environment, radio astronomy, that's two more sciences. And I would even throw in, valuable region for testing human exploration technologies. I would say that's another science. So I think there's like 6 science topics in here. And oh yeah, by the way, the potential for economic growth in space. So either that was buried on purpose or somebody had to fight to get it in there in the first place. Again, makes me really wonder who the members were that contributed to this document, just for the way it's written. And I don't want to get all conspiracy theory on anything, but that stuff does happen in DC. So the nuance, the word order, certain phrases. That stuff adds up over time. And then this one I really love. The United States is going to be leading this thing. Cool. I get that. I mean, this is an American document, so of course they're going to say they're going to do it. But then they also say by all spacefaring nations and entities. U.S. science and technology leadership in cislunar space will support the responsible, peaceful, and sustainable exploration and use of cislunar space, including the moon, by all spacefaring nations and entities. Well, to me, I read this as countries and corporations. The word entities. I think that's countries and corporations. So I'm a little curious why they didn't say that. And maybe they're saying, okay, there's some nonprofits out there. There are some academics, because I keep saying they've been left out of this equation. And does this include DoD assets, right? Is this a crack in the door for Space Force? Notice again, going back to the membership list, it says DoD, but it does not specifically call out Space Force or Air Force or any of the other components of the DoD. DARPA, for example. And yet they all have space assets. So this entities phrase, I think, is interesting. And in a way, when it says by all spacefaring nations, it is setting an expectation that everyone, all spacefaring nations, are going to want to participate in this, are going to want to comply with this, are going to want to be partners on this. And that when we all know that that's not true. But they are looking, the U.S. is looking to be the leaders here. So that's kind of normal. That's kind of their job. So I'm not going to fault them for that. And then again, fostering scientific discovery, economic development, and international cooperation. Again, we're talking about word order, and I think it's kind of important to note here at this point, this international cooperation, I think there's, if I've lost count, please forgive me, but I think there are 23 signatories to the Artemis Accords at this point. And I learned an interesting fact talking to someone I know at International Space University this morning, that the State Department, the U.S. State Department, is hiring hundreds, that was their word, hundreds of people for their space section. Their space section had 5 or 10 people in it before. So I'm really curious. I wanted to ask more questions, but I don't want to put anybody in an awkward situation, so I can't really ask any more questions about that. So I don't have any more information other than, first person interview that the State Department is hiring hundreds of people. So I think that says good things about international cooperation. If you've got 23 signatories to this document, and then the State Department, and by the way, it's the State Department that negotiates this. It's not NASA. NASA proposed it and developed it, and it is a working document, so it's not being like shoved down anyone's throat. They are modifying the accords regularly to admit new members. And it's a voluntary decision, by nations to partner with it. So I think that's pretty interesting that the State Department is hiring that many people for its space sector. So I like that, that this Cislunar Science and Technology strategy is a vision for what we can do, fostering scientific discovery, economic development, and international cooperation. I just think that's really neat. I like that about this document. That's one of the things I like maybe the best, because they keep talking about a positive and expansive vision of the future. Objective 1, I just read it a moment ago. I'm going to read it again. Support research and development to enable long-term growth in cislunar space. And within that paragraph, it talks about positive, expansive vision of the future. I want to point you to a document you probably have not ever heard of before. Give me a second. I'm not sure who the person who just wrote that long chat is. Give me 1 second. You're not named in it, which is weird because everybody else is named. So give me a second on your question here or your comment. And then the document that I'm talking about, the very few people have seen, is called The Future of Space 2060. Now, I immediately had some pushback on the date of that document, 2060, because it was written in a way, again, for political cover that made it seem like space is a long ways away and we're going to work on it a little bit at a time, 40 years. I was a part of this, so I'm going to be really candid about my role here. I was one of about 120 people that were part of this workshop. It is a great document, primarily organized by the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force. I don't think he was the chief scientist of Space Force at the time. I think he was the chief scientist of Air Force Space Command. So I might have my timing off on that a little bit. 2019, I don't think he was, I don't think Space Force has been stood up just yet. But he lays out a really interesting 8-part potential for what the future of space was going to be. And it's worth reading. It's Kobina. Hey, Kobina. Thanks, buddy. So let me get to Kobina's question here. See, I'm just going to read it in case people can't see it. He says, "Great session, MJL." That's me. Looks like several agendas are at play at the same time here. One, which isn't necessarily obvious, is the attempt at being in the driving seat for the development norms of behaviors for our space through national policy and legal drives. I agree. Absolutely, that's true. And I don't even think that's hidden. I think they're really working that in clearly. Continuing his quote, in the absence of a clear and up-to-date body of applicable governing space law, an initiative that needs considerable resources, and then it's cut off, guy. I can't read the rest of it. So I'm just going to answer the piece I can. There is definitely a soft power element to this document. I don't think it's subtle. I think it's very very overt. But that's what they're aiming at. They're trying to build alliances and partnerships. And Kobina, you and I have talked independently, but there's an element of the Artemis Accords that are, I think, my view. This is my view. I'm not reading anything off of it. I'm not using anybody else's opinion here. My view is the Artemis Accords are a modern update and a pushback on China's Belt and Roads Initiative. And an interesting detail in this document that I am working on reading is China and no other nations are not mentioned in this document. Wow, that was a very convoluted sentence. Let me say that again. No nations, China or any others, are mentioned by name in this document. This is a very Amerocentric perspective, and this document is meant to be a beacon on the hill that other nations work with. So it doesn't pretend to be anything other than that. Objective number 2, expand international. Hey, Kobina, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning there, sir. Maybe it's 2 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. I'm guessing your kiddo is keeping you awake. Anyway, thanks for joining us. I appreciate that. Objective number 2, expand international S&T science and technology cooperation in cislunar space. I like this one. This is what I was saying, that this is an overt tool for international cooperation. Foster peace, everybody loves that. Develop responsible practices. Well, I think everybody knows on this call that we have asked for, and some folks at various levels of the UN have agreed that we shouldn't do any more anti-satellite tests. If anybody knows me personally, they know that I rant about this, that the US, China, Russia, and India have all done anti-satellite tests. As much as I love the Indian people, I really don't think that they should have kind of gotten into that arena. Like, I don't think that helped them on the political stage. But the one that worries me is Russia, because all 4 of these actors did it once, and once is to prove that you can. But Russia did it twice, which signals to the world that they will. And that's a different kind of problem. So when I look at this kind of document about develop responsible practices, that's what I'm thinking when I see this. Expand international cooperation in cislunar space. Develop responsible practices. I think that's kind of important. Okay. We've talked a bit about the Artemis Accords. I do recommend that you read them. They're pretty short. Curiously, even though I talk about them a lot, I didn't have the foresight to link them. So if somebody can, get me a link to the current copy of the Artemis Accords, I'll post it. But they're pretty important, and it says new international cooperation can also amplify U.S. objectives being achieved with the Artemis Accords by demonstrating how activities can be carried out for the benefit of and the interests of all nations, even nations that don't agree with us, including developing nations, while enhancing transparency and building confidence and cooperation among moonfaring entities during this important decade for cislunar development. Now, I do think it's interesting that they toss in moonfaring entities, because while low Earth orbit, geosynchronous orbit, they're full. There's a lot of actors in the various orbits. There are not very many moonfaring entities. What do we have? We have Russia first, United States second, China third, successfully, India and Israel unsuccessfully, and Japan's on its way next week. Right? That's moonfaring entities. There's 6. Am I missing any? I don't think I am, but if somebody wants to let me know, that would be helpful. This document very clearly states it wants that cooperation, and it will build it. And that, plus the information I just shared with you a minute ago, that the State Department is adding tons of assets, tons of people and resources, that tells me that this is getting a big push. And then I'm going to just speed through these next parts so we could go on to next week's stuff. Finally, extend U.S. space situational awareness capabilities into cislunar space. You can read language in DC a certain way. So SSA, space situational awareness, is civilian speak, and SDA, space domain awareness, is military speak. So I think that's kind of important. there's going to be a lot of SSA, SDA stuff that's happening in the near future. The U.S. government will define requirements for new space situational awareness capabilities, including associated reference systems and data sharing. So, whether people like it or not, pardon me, whether people like it or not, there's we basically built a national and then international telephone standard, and the world uses that. We built a national then international aircraft standard for tracking planes, and then the world uses that. We built a national then international set of protocols for the internet, and then the world uses that. So what this is saying is, look, we're going to build the data sets for SSA, and we're kind of expecting the world to participate. And I think that's consistent with our history and kind of the rest of the world's kind of uptake history. I do want to point out, and I missed this when I was going through it a second ago, this note about including developing nations and all other nations. I when I was doing this review, I looked it up. There are, according to Wikipedia, which I know best source ever, but that's what I had. According to Wikipedia, there are 77 space agencies. That's about 10 more than I thought there was. And there's about 24 in development. By the way, Ghana is not on that list, Kobanius, if you want to update that list. But there's only 11 of those 77 with budgets over $500 million. NASA is first with 23 billion. China is second with 11. And then the combination of 22 nations of the European Space Agency, that's $7.5 billion. So while there are a lot of developing space programs, I'm not going to say developing countries, because there are big countries that are just starting their space programs. I like that this is trying to reach out to everybody and be somewhat inclusive. And then the final part that we're going to talk about is implement Cislunar communications and positioning, navigation, and timing capabilities with scalable and interoperable approaches. PNT is key to space. It is key to everything in space. If you get it wrong, people will die. That seems like it should be the most obvious and simplest thing to do. I love that it's an interoperable approach. We're going to talk about that a lot on Wednesday. But there are some sources. Where's LunaNet? LunaNet. Here's LunaNet. If anybody wants to look into interoperable sources, there's that. LunaNet is trying really hard to build out interoperable PNT, position, navigation, and timing capabilities. And they're trying to build the internet for space, which I think is pretty awesome. All right, and with that, we're going to close out today's program. There's a ton more, so I hope everybody comes back on Wednesday. I know this stuff can be kind of in the weeds, but again, you saw all the agencies and organizations. There are literal billions of dollars at stake based on this document. So it is kind of important to know where people are coming from and what they're doing. And with that, I want to encourage everybody to join us on Wednesday, to stick with us over the coming weeks, months, and years as we develop this program around the money and finance and capitalization of space. Because if we follow the money, we can build some really, really big things. And I was trying to remember where the phrase "no bucks, no Buck Rogers" came from, which I'm not even sure is relevant anymore. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people have watched The Right Stuff, the movie. I don't know if people know the 30s and 70s TV show Buck Rogers. So I don't even know if that phrase is relevant anymore, but that's been circling in my head for a couple days now. So I still use it, although I do wonder if I've dated myself by bringing it up. All right, with that, y'all, I want to encourage you to join us next week, or I'm sorry, on Wednesday, and then I'm going to try and bring in some guests to share their perspective on some of these policy documents coming out. So that'll be in the upcoming weeks. We've got a great December already planned out. So with that, thanks, everybody. I enjoy having you all here. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.